Hey guys, tonight we slip off our boots, unroll a wool blanket, and step into the smoky, sheep-scented stillness of a Mongol postal yurt. It's not much to look at. Felt walls, low ceiling, and a faint draft that smells like horse, but it's about to become the headquarters of one of the most efficient communication networks the world had seen by the 13th century. You're out on the vast steppe, wind tickling your cheeks, under a sky wide enough to swallow your thoughts whole. Around you, endless rolling plains, and a silence only broken by the occasional whinny or crack of hooves on frost. There's a fire sputtering in a pit at the yurt's center, and a young rider, maybe 16, sits nearby, polishing a chunk of iron that might be a stirrup or a weapon. His name might be Batar, but honestly, you're too tired to ask. He offers you a bowl of something that smells fermented and faintly like sour apples. You drink it. Probably a mistake. You're here to shadow a courier on the Mongol Yam, Genghis Khan's empire-wide postal relay system. Think of it like a medieval FedEx, but with more horses, fewer unions, and a higher chance of being chased by wolves. You, of course, will be terrible at this. You probably won't survive a week out here. The horses demand constant attention, the yurts aren't heated, not really, and the average rider swaps mounts like you switch playlists. There's no GPS. Just stars, smoke signals, and pure, dumb bravado. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love hearing that. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn, wrapped in camel wool, a thin crust of frost kissing your eyebrows. The rider's already up, brushing down a pony that looks more like a stubborn couch than a warhorse. It's small, stocky, shaggy, adorable, in a dangerous, don't turn your back on a kind of way. This will be your ride. You're not thrilled. He hands you a saddlebag, roughly the size of a toddler, and packed with unknown things. Leather tubes, folded parchment, maybe a hunk of cheese so dry it could file your nails. Everything here has a purpose. Even that goat bladder hanging from the wall, which you should definitely not use for drinking. You trudge outside into a wind that doesn't so much blow as judge. A wooden post nearby marks this stop as part of the YAM system. Think of it as the medieval Mongolian equivalent of a QR code. It lets riders know they're on the right route. These way stations are spaced about 25 to 30 miles apart, just far enough for a fast horse to run full tilt without collapsing in a sweaty heap. Historians still argue whether the YAM was inspired by earlier Chinese courier networks or something entirely unique to the Mongols. Either way, it was a stroke of logistical genius. Riders carried messages across 7,000 miles of empire with shocking speed, sometimes covering up to 200 miles in a day, thanks to fresh mounts waiting at each post. Inside the yurt, the fire has died down, and the scent of burned milk and boiled mutton lingers. You step back in for one last warming slurp of air. On a wall hangs a strange item, half mask, half badge. It's a gerage, a metal tablet issued by the Khan himself. It acts like an imperial backstage pass, allowing messengers free access to resources, horses, food, shelter, anywhere in the empire. You ask if you can touch it. The rider gives you a look like you just asked to lick the Khan's boots. Fair enough. Your first ride is brief, a test run. You and the rider gallop to the next station, a 2-hour blur of hoofbeats and frozen tears. You pass a group of yurts clustered like mushrooms after rain, steam rising from their chimneys. Somewhere, a child waves. A dog chases you for about half a mile. You don't stop. At the next station, you swap horses. The new one looks angrier. This yurt is busier. There are crates of dried meat, stacks of firewood, sacks of grain. One old man sits outside grinding something that smells like charcoal and onions into powder. He doesn't explain. You don't ask. It might be tea. It might be poison. It's probably both. Inside, another rider bursts in, flinging off snow and shaking a scroll loose from his belt. The station master unrolls it, squints, grunts, and sends him off again. Messages here aren't sealed with wax. They're tied with knots or marked with strange symbols, unreadable to anyone without training. Security through obscurity. One curious little detail. Couriers sometimes carried oral messages too. They'd memorize entire dispatches, delivering them word for word. A useful skill, unless you had a long night, or were prone to daydreaming mid-gallop. Which, given the landscape, is understandable. The Mongol steppe is like one massive meditation app, except the wind might slap you. You stretch your legs, chew on a strip of horse jerky, not bad, tastes like regret, and prepare to ride again. The rider, your companion, grins at your saddle posture. You are, apparently, doing everything wrong. You decide not to care. That night, you return to your original yurt. The fire's been stoked, and a new pot of something gloopy simmers in the corner. You collapse onto a stack of blankets, muscles aching in places you didn't know you had. The rider nods approvingly. You didn't fall off. Not even once. Outside, stars smear across the sky like spilt milk. A low howl echoes from far off, or maybe it's just the wind playing tricks. You drift toward sleep with the soft clink of harness buckles and the distant sound of hooves. Already, another courier is galloping through the darkness, bearing words from one corner of an empire to the other. And all of it starts in yurts just like this. You wake up groggy, one cheek pressed into a scratchy wool blanket that smells vaguely of sheep and ambition. The fire in the center of the yurt has burned low, but its heat still clings to the air like a loyal dog. Your back aches from a night spent mostly horizontal, but not quite comfortable. Outside, hooves crunch softly on frostbitten earth as the first couriers of the day begin their rides. The teenager, your rider guide, is already halfway through his morning routine, teeth scrubbed with birch ash, face splashed with water from a sheep bladder, hair neatly braided. You, meanwhile, look like a particularly lost pillow. He hands you a hunk of curdled mare's milk and gestures toward the flap. It's time to ride again, but today, he starts talking. And what he talks about is Genghis Khan. You know Genghis, or at least you think you do. Ruthless conqueror, destroyer of cities, occasional pyramid of skulls enthusiast. But here, in the soft light of dawn and the constant hush of wind, you hear a different story, that of a leader obsessed with connection. For Genghis Khan, conquest was only half the job. The other half, making sure all the moving parts of his impossibly vast empire could talk to each other. Enter the Yam system. You can picture the scene, Genghis seated in a dusty tent, fingers steepled, listening to reports from every corner of the steppe. He knew that swift communication meant control. Without it, his rule would splinter faster than a horse's ankle on river ice. So he created the Yam, a vast relay network of postal stations, mounted messengers, and supply depots stretching thousands of miles across Asia. Not only was this brilliant, it was also utterly Mongol. The word Yam itself means checkpoint or station, but don't let the simplicity fool you. This was a logistical monster hiding in plain felt. Historians still argue whether the original idea came from Chinese systems like the Han dynasty's courier roads, or perhaps from the Persian Chapar Khana model under Darius. But Genghis didn't just copy, he scaled. He adapted the concept to his mobile culture, turning the nomadic backbone of Mongol life into a flexible, fast-moving web. You ride now along the invisible strands of this web, trying to imagine how it looked in full bloom. Picture hundreds of these yurts, some permanent, some seasonal, dotting the empire's major arteries like woolly pit stops. Each station had fresh horses, supplies, and a manager who knew what riders were coming, what they were carrying, and when they should arrive. Efficiency was not optional, it was survival. And it wasn't just the army or government benefiting. The Yam system became a multi-use express lane. Traders, ambassadors, spies, monks, and mailmen all flowed through it. A Buddhist monk could be sipping tea in Beijing on Monday and arguing philosophy in Samarkand by next week, all thanks to the well-oiled gears of the Yam. You stop at a small relay post, little more than a sagging yurt with a camel skin flap. A toothless woman greets you, mutters something unintelligible, then hands the rider a tiny pouch made of stitched rabbit hide. Inside, you peek. Dried berries. Energy snacks for the road. Mongol trail mix. The rider thanks her with a nod, then points to a scroll nailed just inside the entrance. It lists names, likely those of riders expected today. Your name, of course, is not there. You are but a tourist in history, drifting on borrowed saddles and someone else's schedule. Back in the saddle, the rider begins telling stories, half remembered, half legend. One tale is about a relay rider so fast he could deliver a message from Karakoram to the western frontier in 7 days. Another tells of a station master who trained a falcon to retrieve dropped parcels. You doubt both, But you don't say so. Out here, truth is stretchy. And here's a fringe detail. The YAM system didn't just move information, it moved influence. Local leaders knew that these stations could appear overnight, bringing with them the eyes and ears of the Khan. That made people behave, or at least pretend to. What's more, the relay stations weren't always peaceful. Some doubled as mini garrisons or intelligence hubs. A courier might ride in with mail and ride out with a report on a regional rebellion. Sometimes, riders were pulled aside and reassigned. Carry this sealed pouch. Don't ask questions. If someone stops you, deny everything. And yes, Genghis used this system to rule with an iron fist in a felt glove. Messages about taxes, laws, and enemy troop movements sped across the steppe faster than most nations could mobilize. It gave the Mongols a massive tactical advantage, not through brute strength, but through better data. It also created a sense of presence. Even in the farthest corners of the empire, the YAM system reminded people, you are seen. You are heard. And you'd better behave. The sun is now higher, casting long shadows behind rocks and bushes. You pause by a ridge and look out over the endless land. There, faint on the horizon, another station waits. Another warm fire. Another stew flavored with whatever was closest. You can almost hear Genghis laughing, not cruelly, but knowingly. Because even as his empire sprawled across deserts and mountains, it was this, a simple line of yurts, ponies, and messages, stitched together by dusty roads and iron will, that kept it whole. Your rider spurs his horse, and you follow, one hoofbeat at a time, across the veins of a vanished empire. The next day begins, as all good Mongol postal days do, with a slap of wind to the face and a breakfast that challenges your sense of what qualifies as food. This morning, it's a gruel made of millet and something pickled that shouldn't be pickled. You eat it anyway, mostly because your stomach is louder than your pride. The rider you've been shadowing, let's call him Togon for ease, prepares a fresh mount with the practiced grace of someone who's been doing this since before he had all his teeth. You try to help by holding the saddle. It's unclear whether this is helpful or annoying. Probably both. Today's journey will take you deeper into the infrastructure of the YAM system. Not just the glamorous bits, the speed, the glory, the state-sealed scrolls, but the mundane behind-the-scenes operations that kept this vast operation running like a horse with somewhere to be. Spoiler, it's a lot less galloping and a lot more hauling sacks of fermented mare's milk across open plains. You ride out past a frozen creek, where two children are throwing sticks at what may or may not be a frozen goat. Soon, the landscape evens out into flat prairie, no trees, just swells of dry grass and the occasional rock that looks suspiciously like it's judging you. By mid-morning, you reach a larger station, a real hub. This one has 3 yurts, a corral with at least 24 horses, and what appears to be a pile of saddles taller than a man. Men and women bustle about with the focused energy of people who don't have time for small talk. One woman is pouring a thick liquid from a goatskin into wooden bowls. You hope it's tea. It is not tea. Inside the largest yurt, you see something unusual, a table. Not a crate pretending to be a table, but a real one, carved with a swirling motif of clouds and antelope. Atop it rests a series of small wooden tokens, each carved with symbols, some in Uyghur script, others in Chinese characters. This is an inventory system, Togon explains, for tracking goods and riders. Each token represents a courier in the field, and when they pass through, their token is moved along a board. It's like a medieval spreadsheet, and it works. Historians still argue whether the Mongols developed this inventory system entirely on their own or borrowed aspects from Persian record-keeping. What's clear is that by the late 13th century, they were running an incredibly detailed logistics operation. Messages were tracked. Riders were logged. Horses were rotated with near-obsessive regularity. And about those horses, each station kept a stable of remounts. At peak YAM efficiency, there were an estimated 200,000 horses dedicated to the network. That's a whole lot of hooves to feed. Each station employed grooms, stable hands, and at least one poor soul responsible for scooping manure. That job, by the way, never made it into the epic poems. You're invited to try your hand at one of the more routine station tasks, saddle inspection. This involves turning over each piece of gear, checking for wear, and pretending to know what you're doing. You fail impressively. One of the straps you declare perfectly intact, snaps the moment someone touches it. Togon raises an eyebrow. You shrug and mutter something about material fatigue. In a corner, a small boy sits polishing gerage tablets, those imperial passports we mentioned. Some are plain, others more ornate, embossed with falcons or dragons, depending on the rider's status. These tokens didn't just allow passage, they demanded hospitality. Refusing to help someone carrying a gerage could mean serious trouble. Not for the rider, for you. One tablet in particular catches your eye. It's unusually heavy, made of dark metal and carved with a phrase, "By the strength of the eternal blue sky." That's no random slogan, that's a direct nod to Tengri, the sky god of Mongol spirituality, and a reminder that this courier system wasn't just state business, it was cosmic business. Messages moved not just by order of the Khan, but by divine mandate. Try getting that level of authority behind your group chat. Outside, you take a closer look at the remounts. These aren't sleek Arabian beauties. Mongol horses are squat, sturdy, and deeply unimpressed by your presence. One of them, possibly named Borte, possibly named Trouble, nudges your shoulder with enough force to nearly knock you over. Togon laughs, then offers you a lump of salt to feed it. You offer your hand, and the horse licks it like you're the world's worst popsicle. There's a story told here, mostly in grins and half-muttered words, about a courier who once made it through 3 snowstorms and a wolf attack in under 4 days, just to deliver a silk-wrapped message to a general in Bokhara. True or not, the fact that it's told at every station means it feels true. These are the kinds of tales that knit an empire together, not just grand battles, but grit and windburn and stubborn little horses named Trouble. As you prepare to leave the station, one of the workers gives you a wrapped bundle. Inside is a warm pastry filled with sweet bean paste. You don't know where it came from, or how it stayed so fresh out here, but you bite into it like it's a gift from the gods. It kind of is. Togon points west, toward the line of hills that marks the next sector of the Yam. You mount up again, getting slightly better at it, but not enough to impress the horses, and ride on, the pastry still warm in your pocket, the memory of spreadsheets made of wood and sky deity passports settling into your mind like dust in a quiet room. This isn't just a postal network. It's an empire, written one hoofbeat at a time. You ride on, squinting into the wind, which has decided today is a good day to exfoliate your face with sand. Togon pulls his scarf tighter and says something you don't catch, though it's probably the Mongol equivalent of, "This is nothing." And to be fair, it's only a mild dust storm, not the kind that buries entire caravans or rearranges your opinion of open landscapes. Today, as you bounce along a well-worn trail between 2 low ridges, the focus turns to the riders themselves. Because while the yurts, the horses, and the felt-wrapped logistics all matter, none of it works without the flesh-and-blood couriers galloping their way across the bones of an empire. These riders were the lifeblood of the Yam system. Men, and sometimes women, though historians debate how often, selected for speed, endurance, and the kind of bone-deep familiarity with the land that makes compasses feel redundant. Most were ethnic Mongols, though as the empire expanded, others joined: Turks, Uyghurs, Tanguts, even Slavs in the western fringes. Diversity wasn't a flaw in the system, it was the system. If you could ride and follow orders, you had a saddle. At your current pace, jostling gently on a horse whose gait you've started to name the dental loosener, you have plenty of time to observe Togon. He moves like he was born in motion. You suspect he could fall asleep in the saddle and still arrive on time, with a message secured and a mental map of every watering hole within 100 miles. Most riders traveled 25 to 30 miles between relay stations, switching horses and continuing without much pause. But in emergencies, or if the courier held elite status, they could ride double that, or even through the night. The fastest riders were known to cover 200 miles in a single day, changing mounts 8 to 10 times. That's like Uber Eats with a vengeance. You reach a tiny solitary yurt, barely more than a dome-shaped bump on the land, and meet another courier on his rest break. He's lean, sun-dark, and grinning as though he's just heard the best joke you'll never understand. He offers you a scrap of dried meat so tough it might qualify as self-defense. You chew it slowly, pretending it's delicious. It isn't. This rider, let's call him Batu, tells a tale, with Togon half-translating and half-embellishing, of a young courier who once rode 3 consecutive legs of the Yam without sleeping, pausing only to dunk his face in snow to stay awake. Apparently, he arrived with bloodshot eyes, a torn boot, and a message declaring a new tax law. The townspeople hated the tax, but respected the hustle. Historians still argue whether Mongol couriers were full-time specialists or part-time conscripts, drawn from the local population. Some sources suggest elite couriers, those with gerage tablets, were well-paid and carried diplomatic immunity. Others describe a grimmer picture: young men pressed into service, enduring freezing nights and boiling days with little more than a felt cloak and questionable stew. Either way, the reality is this: being a rider wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting, dangerous, and frequently disgusting. You had to fend off wolves, bandits, and boredom. Saddle sores were just part of the uniform. And yet, many couriers were proud. Riding for the Khan meant trust. It meant you were part of something vast and humming and slightly terrifying. Togon shows you one of his older gerage tags, its edges worn smooth by years of use. It's not flashy, just a stamped copper oval, but you sense its weight. Not just literal weight, though it does make your pocket sag a bit when he lets you hold it. This was a license to ride, to command resources, to say, "Yes, I need your horse," and be obeyed. One fringe detail you learn from Batu: some couriers carried herbal sleep aids with them, bundles of dried wild thyme or crushed poppy seeds. Not for themselves, but for the horses. A twitchy horse could ruin a route, so calming herbs were sometimes fed before long rides. Mongol veterinary science, surprisingly nuanced. Midday, you stop at a grassy hollow, where a shallow spring bubbles quietly under a patch of moss. It's a rest stop for riders, marked only by a pile of stones and a horse skull on a stick. The skull has a strip of red cloth tied around its jaw. You ask what it means. Togon shrugs. Old tradition, he says. Protection for riders. Or warning. Depends. This ambiguity sums up much of the YAM system. So much of it was practical, grounded in logistics, but so much of it was also layered with ritual, folklore, and soft threats. Travel under the Khan's banner, and you were both protected and scrutinized. Slip up, and there was no appeal court in the next town over. You were either trusted, or not seen again. And here's another layer: courier riders weren't always alone. High-ranking messengers sometimes traveled in small groups for safety or ceremony. Others carried not just scrolls, but musicians, astrologers, even small animals meant as diplomatic gifts. Imagine trotting across the Mongolian plateau with a goat in your satchel and a note that says, "With warmest regards from Karakoram." As the day winds down, you crest another ridge and see a station in the distance, its smoke curling peacefully into the amber sky. Your legs are jelly, your lips chapped, and your ears still ringing from the wind. Togon turns, grins, and says something you do understand: "Good day's ride." You nod, trying to look like this was all completely normal. Inside, you're about to collapse into a nap so deep it might qualify as geological. But before that, one last task. Togon pulls a small sealed scroll from his satchel and hands it to the station master, who nods, checks a board of tokens, and moves one carved disc 2 spaces to the right. Somewhere, hundreds of miles away, another rider is already preparing his saddle, unaware that you, the unlikeliest courier in Mongol history, just helped nudge the system one hoofbeat forward. You wake before sunrise, bundled in layers of wool and an unfamiliar animal smell that refuses to identify itself. The yurt is warm, almost too warm, and the air is thick with the scent of charcoal, boiled milk, and someone's unwashed boots. Togon is already awake, of course. He moves like a man who considers sleep an occasional luxury rather than a necessity. Today, he tells you, you'll be shadowing the lesser-known but absolutely critical members of the YAM system, the support staff who kept the wheels turning, or in this case, the horses fed, the yurts upright, and the couriers clothed in something other than regret. These people don't ride from station to station. They stay put, living their entire lives at these nodes of empire. Think of them as the gears inside a pocket watch, unseen, unglamorous, but entirely essential. Without them, no message makes it more than a few miles before collapsing under the weight of logistical chaos. Your first lesson of the day comes from a woman named Naren, the station steward. She manages inventory, coordinates horse rotations, and, perhaps most crucially, keeps a mental map of which riders are due when, and what mood they're likely to be in upon arrival. She does all this while weaving a saddle blanket and yelling at a teenager for forgetting to refill the water trough. Multitasking. Mastered. She hands you a thin ledger, more of a felt-bound notebook, really, and shows you the symbols used to track rations: dried meat, fermented mare's milk, millet, and an alarming quantity of onions. Each rider gets a standard portion, adjusted by rank and whether they brought their own supplies. Some cheat, she says, not unkindly. We cheat back. And here's the thing historians still argue about: how standardized was all this? Some accounts suggest the yam system had detailed provisioning protocols, dictated by central authorities. Others hint at a more decentralized, station-by-station improvisation. What's likely is that it was both, core rules with local flavor, quite literally in the case of that onion stew you're now politely declining. You're given the task of measuring out feed for the horses. It's not hard work, but it's precise. Mongol horses were hardy but picky. Too little and they falter, too much and they bolt. Togon watches as you fill the troughs, occasionally correcting your scoops with the patient air of someone who has seen many travelers do much dumber things. Outside, another crew is repairing a yurt. The felt cover has torn in the night, likely from wind or possibly from an overeager goat. You're handed a curved needle and a length of sinew. Sewing a yurt feels like a strange dream you once had, but the muscle memory kicks in. Kind of. You stab yourself only twice. One of the workers, a man missing half an eyebrow and all of his indoor voice, tells you stories as you stitch. About a time a Chinese envoy brought a giant lacquered chair as a gift for the station chief. It was beautiful, but too tall for the yurt. They used it to store saddlebags. Chair never once sat on, he says proudly. Too good. You're ushered into the cooking area next, where an old man named Batar is brewing a mixture of milk tea and something smoky. He explains the importance of warm, salty liquids for riders. Water alone can chill the stomach, he says. Tea with salt. That'll put fire in your bones. You drink some. It tastes like optimism wrapped in brine. A group of children pass by, laughing as they balance on a low fence made from horse skulls. You blink. Yes, horse skulls. It's a kind of fence marker used in the steppes, not as creepy as it sounds, unless you're new here. The skulls are bleached, some decorated with bits of red cloth or tiny etched symbols. Part protection charm, part boundary marker, part "don't mess with our horses" message. And speaking of horses, the station's farrier invites you to watch as he checks a mare's hooves. Mongol horses, remember, weren't shoed like European ones. Their hooves were strong enough to handle the terrain barefoot, but regular trimming was essential. The farrier's knife is curved, worn, and moves with quiet confidence. Hoof wrong, he mutters, ride wrong. It's a mantra that applies to the whole operation. If the yurts sag, if the rations sour, if the firewood's damp, everything else suffers. The couriers may carry the empire's voice, but it's these anonymous hands that shape the breath. You help chop firewood for the evening, your arms quickly discovering muscles they'd forgotten existed. The axe is heavier than it looks. By the third log, you're sweating through 3 layers. Togon just chuckles and keeps stacking logs with the casual brutality of someone born with calluses. Later, as dusk creeps in and the horizon starts to blur with smoke and sky, Naren sits with you near the fire. She tells you of her uncle, who once managed a station on the route to Samarkand. He kept meticulous records, not just of supplies, but of each rider's favorite meal, favorite horse, even favorite saddle. He believed, she says, that comfort makes speed. You nod, more than half asleep already. She adds, he also once kicked a thief so hard the man spoke in rhymes for a week. The fire crackles, and you look around, the yurts glowing from within, the quiet shuffle of horses being settled, the laughter of children echoing across the steppe. This is the heartbeat of the yam. Not the racing couriers or the glittering decrees, but the unseen rhythm of daily effort, reliable, repetitive, and strangely soothing. A breeze stirs, tugging at the felt walls and carrying the scent of tea, smoke, and animal. Somewhere nearby, someone begins to hum a melody too soft to catch. It blends with the wind, like the memory of something you never quite lived. And just like that, another link in the chain is forged, quietly, steadily, without fanfare. You wake to the sound of horses snorting and ropes creaking, followed by someone loudly regretting last night's stew. The morning is golden and sharp-edged, the kind that makes every smell feel like it's auditioning for permanence. Togon tosses you a piece of barley flatbread, nods toward the horizon, and says, "Today, inspectors." Now, you might have assumed that once the yam system was built, it ran like a well-oiled machine left to its own devices. But no, this was an empire that checked its homework. Enter the Tamga inspectors, the empire's quiet accountants of infrastructure, roaming auditors who ensured the stations weren't just existing, but excelling. You pack quickly and head out with Togon. Within an hour, you meet one such inspector on the road, a wiry man in his 40s, riding a sleek gray mare and wearing a robe with suspiciously clean stitching. His name is Otgonbear, and he greets you with the wary politeness of someone who has recently stepped in something. Otgonbear carries a small chest strapped behind his saddle. Inside, blank ledgers, carved tokens, replacement gerrage plates, and, curiously, a tiny hourglass. To time the honesty, he jokes, though you're not sure if he's kidding. Inspectors like him would arrive unannounced, evaluate the station supplies, horse conditions, food quality, and record-keeping. If anything fell below standard, well, let's just say promotions were not in order. At the next station, you watch the inspection unfold. Naren, the station steward from earlier, straightens up and offers tea, but there's a new tension in her shoulders. Otgonbear declines, eyes sweeping the yurt like a cat in a new room. He starts with the horse pens, noting hoof conditions, saddle integrity, and even the placement of the feed troughs. He counts the horses aloud. One of them sneezes at just the right moment, throwing off his tally. He questions the station cook about supply rotation. "Why are the millet bags newer than the date listed here?" he asks, tapping a ledger. The cook mutters something about a caravan delay. Otgonbear makes a note. You don't want to know what kind. Historians still debate how widespread and regular these inspections were. Some records describe a near-obsessive level of oversight: monthly audits, surprise visits, rider evaluations. Others suggest a looser system, where inspectors doubled as tax collectors or informants, with some authority but little actual power. What's agreed upon, the YAM system functioned better when someone was watching. You notice Otgonbear also carries a bag of small metal tokens, each marked with a symbol representing different types of deficiencies: spoiled food, tired horses, yurt disrepair, late riders. If a station received too many of one token, reputation damage. And in an empire where reputation and utility went hand in hand, that could mean less funding, fewer supplies, or even being reassigned to a less traveled route. Siberia, anyone? A highlight of the inspection is the message relay test. Otgonbear writes a brief message on a wax tablet and hands it to a rider with orders to deliver it to the next station and return with a reply. You tag along, partly for the experience, partly because you've been promised cheese dumplings on the return leg. Priorities. The rider takes off, hooves thudding against the dry earth. The test is simple. How fast can a standard message be relayed and returned under realistic conditions? You follow at a slower pace, arriving at the next station just in time to see the response being prepared, a reply carved on the same wax tablet, smoothed over and rewritten with an iron stylus. By the time you get back, Otgonbear is lounging in the shade, chewing on something leathery and pungent. He takes the tablet, reads it, nods. "Acceptable," he says. A high compliment, apparently. Later, you overhear a conversation between Otgonbear and Togon. It's in a mix of Mongolian and Chinese, but you catch enough. They talk about a station farther east that's been reported as Ghost Run, supposedly operating, but actually abandoned, with couriers forging logs and pocketing supplies. "Khan won't like that," Togon mutters. "Khan doesn't like surprises." And here's a fringe tidbit. In rare cases, inspectors were given judicial power. If corruption was found, real, proven, and egregious, they could administer punishment on site. This might mean demotion, confiscation of goods, or in a few grisly accounts, something involving rope, a horse, and a very short ride. But Otgonbear seems more practical than punitive. Most errors, he tells you over dinner, aren't betrayal, just fatigue. He stirs his tea thoughtfully. But fatigue, untreated, becomes failure. As night falls, you sit near the station's fire circle. Otgonbear jots notes by flickering light, occasionally glancing at you as if wondering what kind of report you'd earn. Probably something like, eats slowly, sews poorly, listens well. The wind picks up slightly, tugging at the yurt flaps and bringing with it the distant scent of pine, or possibly wet goat. Togon strums a two-stringed instrument called a morin kur, its horsehead scroll glinting in the firelight. The sound is haunting, low, and twining, like wind caught in memory. As you drift closer to sleep, the inspector's silhouette sits steady in the firelight, pen moving slowly, recording one more day in the breathing machine of empire. You wake groggy, disoriented, and very sure that whatever dream you just had involved a goose and some unspoken shame. The fire has gone to embers, and the inspector is already gone, vanished into the folds of the empire like a whisper through canvas. Togon, ever chipper despite looking like he sleeps upright, claps you on the back. "Today," he says, "we meet the riders. You assumed you'd already met them. After all, this whole enterprise exists for couriers, men on horseback, ferrying orders, secrets, supplies, and the occasional runaway poet. But today's ride isn't about shadowing. It's about learning what makes a yam courier tick, chafe, and sometimes fall asleep in the saddle. You're introduced to two couriers this morning. One is Erden, young and wiry, with a cheeky grin and the perpetual energy of someone who drinks more fermented mare's milk than is medically advisable. The other is Ganbader, older, quieter, his eyes the color of dust and resignation. He's on his third lifetime of doing this, Erden jokes. Ganbader does not laugh. They walk you through their gear. The saddle is lightweight and made for speed, the stirrups short, the reins worn smooth from years of use. Each courier carries a satchel with food, water, fire-starting tools, and a felt-wrapped message case called a bittig. It's more than a scroll tube, it's a symbol of trust. Losing one could mean more than just punishment, it could unravel diplomatic relations. Then there's the gerage, a kind of passport badge that identifies them as official messengers of the Khan. It's a polished metal tablet, often inscribed with Mongolian script and sometimes marked with the imperial seal. Flashing it at a relay station isn't just for show. It means food, fresh horses, and no questions asked. Kind of like the world's oldest VIP pass. You mount up with Erden and Ganbader, riding alongside as they demonstrate a typical stretch of the relay. The terrain is a mix of rolling hills and scrubby brush, and the horses trot with ease. You bounce like a sack of wet flour. Ganbader gives you a look. You try to look dignified. You fail. During a rest stop, Erden shows you his stash of rider's tricks, dried cheese curds to chew for alertness, a wristband made of knotted hair he believes wards off bad luck, and a pebble he rolls under his tongue on long rides. Keeps the mouth moist, he explains. Also, gives you something to do besides panic. Ganbader, by contrast, seems to rely on silence and spite to power his rides. He only speaks once in the first hour, pointing to a ridge and saying, "Once saw a wolf chase a courier right off that edge. Horse survived. Courier didn't." Historians still argue whether yam riders were primarily military men, civil servants, or drawn from local nomadic populations. Some sources suggest they were elite, trusted warriors. Others describe them as everyday herders drafted into imperial service with promises of pay and protection. Like many things in Mongol history, the truth likely lay somewhere in between. But what's not debated, these men were fast. A well-run yam relay could deliver messages from Karakoram to Beijing in a matter of days. That's over 1,000 miles. With fresh horses at every station, a skilled courier could average close to 200 miles per day, if the weather didn't hate them and the rivers behaved. As you ride, Erden recounts some of the oddest things he's delivered. Once, he says, he was tasked with carrying a single feather, wrapped in silk, no less, from a Persian envoy to the Khan. "Symbol of peace," he says. Or insult. "They never told me which." Ganbader grunts. "I once carried a cat." You blink. A cat. Ambassador's favorite. Disliked all stations. Bit me twice. You reach another station by late afternoon. The change of horses is brisk and mechanical. One in, one out. Hooves barely cool before the next rider takes off. You help rub down the sweating flanks of a mare just returned from a stretch of open plain. Her eyes are wide, pupils dark and glassy. She's tired but willing, qualities the Mongols prized in both horses and humans. One quirky detail you notice: many of the horses wear small bells tied into their manes. Not decorative, but practical. The jingling helped alert the next station that a courier was near, especially in bad weather or low visibility. Plus, it kept the rider awake, nothing like your own soundtrack to stave off dozing. Dinner is a shared affair. The couriers sit cross-legged, passing around bowls of thick stew and bread so hard you could file nails with it. Erden retells the story of the feather, again, but adds that the Persian envoy also tried to pay him in dates and riddles. Only one was edible, he laughs. You ask if they ever lose their way. Ganbater shrugs. Once. Storm. No stars. Rode in circles until horse gave up. You try not to ask how that ended. As the sky darkens and stars begin to blink awake, you're struck by the raw, repetitive beauty of it all. The hoofbeats, the breathing, the quiet hunger, the click of wooden flasks against leather. This isn't just messaging. It's choreography, an empire's heartbeat pulsing across the earth in rhythmic gallops and soft snorts. And somewhere in that rhythm, as your eyes start to droop and your bones hum with saddle ache, you realize something. The Mongols didn't just conquer territory. They conquered time. With each courier, each fresh horse, each creaking saddle strap, they bent vast distances into manageable spans. And somehow, despite the speed and the strain, it's peaceful. Like being part of a living organism that knows exactly what it's doing. The next morning smells like smoked meat and damp horse blanket, distinct, not exactly pleasant, but oddly reassuring now. You stretch your legs, soar in places you didn't know had nerve endings, and gear up for today's focus. How the Mongols kept all this running, not just with discipline and riders, but with resources. Supply chains, baby. As Togon slings a bundle of dried meat over his saddle, he grins. Today you learn how the soup keeps cooking. He gestures toward the flat horizon, where nothing seems to be moving, yet somehow you're told a whole logistical ballet is always underway. The yam system might have looked like a linear string of yurts and horses, but it was far more complex. Behind every fresh saddle and pot of millet porridge was an elaborate web of support. Farmers, herders, blacksmiths, cooks, quartermasters, rope weavers, and the occasional bureaucrat with a mild superiority complex. You pass a modest encampment, half station, half supply depot. It's bustling in a quiet, industrious way. Someone's tanning hides, someone's boiling a suspiciously purple stew, and a teen is trying to convince a stubborn mule to let go of a ladle. These aren't couriers, but the folks who keep the couriers alive. The unsung workhorses of the yam. One woman, Oyun, waves you over. She's stirring a cauldron of what you're assured is mostly lentils. We send stew paste in leather bladders, she explains. Add water later. Good for road. Less fighting than beans. This, she says, is crucial for morale. You make a mental note to never underestimate lentil diplomacy. The supply staff rotates duties. 1 month grinding flour, another shoeing horses, another assembling saddle parts or sewing weatherproof felt for the yurts. And those yurts? They didn't just appear like pop-up tents. Entire units specialized in repairing them, wooden lattice frames, wool coverings, silk ties if you were fancy. You spot a child carefully combing the mane of a backup horse. Training to spot ticks, Oyun notes. Also, bonding. Horse won't run from you if it likes your face. You can't help but admire that logic, impeccable in its simplicity. Here's your mainstream fact. To sustain the yam, the Mongol state imposed a kind of imperial tax, not always in coin, but in goods or labor. Every region under Mongol control contributed what it could: grain from northern China, sheep from the steppes, textiles from Persia. These were redistributed along the yam route to ensure stations had everything they needed, even in the middle of nowhere. Fringe tidbit time. Some stations, especially the more remote or strategically placed ones, had underground ice pits, covered with straw and shaded by trees. These primitive refrigerators could keep meat and milk products cool for weeks, allowing for a surprisingly fresh diet even in summer. Mongol coolers. Who knew? And here's where the scholarly arguments come in. Historians still debate how standardized the supply chain actually was. Some argue there was a central bureaucracy in Karakoram that tracked food and horse numbers across the empire with near-modern efficiency. Others suggest a more ad hoc, locally managed system that depended on regional governors and their enthusiasm, or lack thereof. One thing's for sure, something worked, because the yam didn't collapse under its own weight. You help carry a sack of horse feed to a smaller depot nearby. It's made from a mix of barley, dried grass, and something that smells like regret. The horses love it. A man named Kulan shows you how to braid ropes from yak hair, while another trims horseshoes with a file and a surprisingly catchy work song. Even spiritual support played a part in the logistics. Some stations had shrines to Tengri, the sky god, or local spirits, with offerings of salt, fermented milk, or cloth strips. Spirits eat luck, one caretaker explains. So we feed them often. You ask Togon what happens when a station runs out of supplies. He scratches his head. Then the couriers complain. Then the riders eat their belts. Then the Khan hears about it. Then someone gets reassigned to watching yaks molt. You're not sure if that's a real punishment, but you're also not keen to find out. Toward midday, you watch a trade caravan arrive from the east. It's loaded with silk bolts, spices, and goats that seem deeply unimpressed by everything. Caravans like these often doubled as informal resuppliers for the yam. In return for imperial protection and preferential treatment, they drop off extra grain, tools, or spare clothing. It was a soft barter system, the empire getting what it needed without the bureaucracy always lifting a finger. And the gear. Saddles, bridles, reins, leather armor, even oil for bowstrings, all made or repaired along the way. Each station had at least one craftsperson on hand, usually someone grumbling about the quality of imported thread. Persian silk too slippery, one complains. You want Mongol wool. Holds together. Smells like honesty. By late afternoon, you're back at the main station, your hands smelling of oil, barley, and mild horse. You help stir the stew, which now includes something green and vaguely moving. You're told not to worry. Extra protein. The couriers trickle back in. One's got a torn sleeve, another saddle has cracked, and one poor soul returns with no boots. Horse ate them, he says, with the tired acceptance of someone who has seen weirder. You sit by the fire, chewing a chunk of dried cheese, and watching the entire system breathe around you. Supplies are logged, horses brushed, boots mended. Nothing glamorous, nothing loud, just the steady hum of maintenance. A reminder that empires don't survive on glory. They survive on lentils, hoof picks, and the quiet genius of restocking before anyone has to ask. By the time the next morning arrives, you no longer need waking. Your internal clock is now synced to horse snorts and the clink of cooking pots. You've become one with the yam. Or at least, you know where to find the cleanest outhouse. Today, Togon announces with a dramatic sweep of his arms, you'll learn about the brain behind the yam, the messenger's central command, and how communication across the entire Mongol Empire didn't just exist, it thrived. And he's got just the place to show you. You travel to a larger hub station, something between a yurt village and a logistics nerve center. The scale is impressive. Multiple yurts, each with a specific purpose: dispatching, receiving, feeding, healing, mending, and gossiping. And in the largest one, a curious sight: scrolls. Piles of them. Inked leather tags, carved wooden tallies, and written directives, some bound in silk. Welcome to the Postal Brain Trust. You're shown how messages are received and sorted. Runners, or secondary couriers, arrive from smaller satellite stations, handing over packages, scrolls, and verbal reports. Everything is logged. Not with neat pens and spreadsheets, but with wax seals, bone tokens, and knotted strings indicating content type, urgency, and direction. It's not chaos, it's Mongol filing. Your mainstream fact of the day. At the height of its power, the Mongol Empire's yam system had over 1,400 relay stations. That's a sprawling, interconnected chain covering more than 25,000 miles of territory. Orders could be sent from Karakorum to Baghdad in just a few weeks, a logistical marvel when most of the world was still waiting for carrier pigeons to sober up. But the quirky fringe detail? Messages weren't always on paper. Some were memorized, entire paragraphs recited verbatim, like songs. Mongol couriers were sometimes trained in a proto-mnemonic code, associating words with patterns of breath or rhythm, like ancient beatboxing but with more responsibility. Ganbater, the quiet courier from before, claims he once carried a 500-word royal decree in his head for 5 days straight. Only forgot one verb, he says. Still got paid. Togon explains that major hubs like this one had what he calls a human relay switchboard. If a courier fell ill, a replacement was selected on the spot from standby riders. Messages didn't stop because a man sneezed. They were reassigned, resealed, and resent, often before the tea even cooled. And if you're imagining everyone speaking the same language, think again. The empire spanned dozens of linguistic zones. Mongolian, Chinese, Persian, Uyghur, Arabic, Russian. Couriers didn't have to be fluent in all, but central translators were. These multilingual scribes were essential for keeping communication intelligible and diplomatic. One, a short man named Dolgen with inky fingers and a contagious sneeze, says he can write in 6 scripts but can't spell his own name the same way twice. Historians still debate the extent to which these command hubs were standardized. Some claim they followed a rigid format, passed down through imperial edicts, while others argue they were shaped by local needs and resources, resulting in varied levels of efficiency. A station in Persia might be better equipped than one in Siberia, but both shared the same mission: no delay, no excuses. You watch as a courier brings in a sealed bone tube. It's wrapped in horsehair cord, tagged with a red tassel. A high-priority message. The receiving officer doesn't open it. He stamps the outside with a wax seal indicating arrival time and moves it to the Dispatch West basket. Efficient, understated, elegant. You feel like you're watching an ancient version of FedEx with better hats. Nearby, a team of young writers prepares a wall map. It's made from stitched felt with colored markers showing current message routes, known bandit activity, and weather concerns. One writer moves a green token southwest. This is where the bridge was swept away, she says. We reroute south, use goats if needed. You don't ask what that last part means. You're not emotionally ready. Lunch is millet cakes and boiled mutton. You eat with scribes and writers, listening as they discuss which station has the best fermented milk and whether an imperial clerk once accidentally wrote Mary instead of March. Apparently, a unit of horse archers spent 3 days wondering if they'd been conscripted into a wedding. One of the older scribes, Tomer, shows you a scroll sealed with 3 different wax colors. Triple seal, he explains. Sent from the Khan, through a governor, to a general. Each has to break their color. If someone dies, the next opens it. It's a mix of security, chain of command, and just enough superstition to keep everyone honest. Outside, a boy practices tying the distinctive yam messenger knots, each style signifying a different content type: diplomatic, military, religious, personal. You try one and create something that looks more like a failed friendship bracelet. Good for goat weddings, the boy says, not kindly. You spend the rest of the day observing how the network adapts. When floods come, messages go by raft. When snow blocks passes, ski couriers are sent. Yes, actual medieval postal skiers, mostly in the northern regions. And in truly dire cases, hawks are used to carry summaries. Hawk too expensive to waste on full scroll, Dolgen explains. Only send last sentence. Help. Drought. Send grain. Hugs, governor. As dusk settles, you sit beside the main fire, watching a final round of dispatches leave the station. Riders swing into their saddles like it's second nature, scrolls tucked, gerrage flashing. The command hub winds down, like a giant exhaling, ready to do it all again tomorrow. And you're left with a growing respect for the invisible hands behind the horsemen. The ones who never galloped through storms or faced arrow fire, but who made sure every saddle had stitching, every letter had grammar, and every route had backup. There's a fresh nip in the air this morning as you step outside the central hub station. The fires are low, the horses steamy, and you can feel the hum of the network continuing around you, even if your joints are quietly protesting. Today, Togon tells you, you're going to experience the Yam Highway in full flow, a long-distance ride across a multi-station stretch with timed handoffs. Yes, your first real relay. You're given a modest horse named Tamak, whose expression reads, barely tolerant. He's got the stamina of a monk and the enthusiasm of a disgruntled librarian. But he's yours now, and he has a job to do. Togon hands you a leather pouch containing a sealed message tube, a small cloth bag of dried cheese, and, somewhat alarmingly, a pair of backup socks. Socks are the true secret of empire, he says. You do not question him. You set off along a well-worn path, the grass beaten into submission by decades of hooves. Your pace is steady, and with each rise and dip in the land, you pass the occasional marker, a carved post, a bundle of dyed cloth fluttering from a tree, even a yurt-shaped cairn. They're guideposts, literal breadcrumbs for the relay riders. In the misty morning, they feel like ghostly nods from couriers past. This ride isn't about scenic glory, it's a test of efficiency, terrain knowledge, and trust in the system. You're aiming to reach your first relay station by midday. Togon told you it's manned by a man who smells like onions and reads stars for fun, which sounds promising. The empire, you're learning, isn't run by heroes, it's run by eccentrics with good timing. Mainstream history moment. Riders during the Pax Mongolica, the 13th to 14th century period of relative peace across the empire, could cover around 200 to 250 miles a day using the YAM system. That's not just fast for its time, it's borderline science fiction. They'd swap horses every 20 to 30 miles, barely stopping, just enough to gulp water and get shoved onto the next mount like human baton passes. As you ride, you spot a falconer in the distance. He's training a hawk to track rabbits, but he also doubles as a courier for particularly urgent messages. These raptor-assisted dispatches were rare but real, used for speed and, perhaps, dramatic flair. Fringe detail. There's a theory that a few of these birds were trained to return to a specific scent or sound, like a distant cousin of GPS, only fluffier and prone to mood swings. Around midday, you arrive at the first station. It's a 3-yurt setup nestled by a stream, flanked by low wooden fencing and a bored goat. The man awaiting you is indeed redolent of onions. "Horse good?" he asks. You nod. He doesn't respond, just hands you a water skin, points to the next horse, this one named Whisper, a lie if you've ever heard one, and waves you onward. The handoff takes less than 3 minutes. Historians still argue whether Mongol relay riders carried identification. Some sources mention carved bone tokens or stamp tags, while others claim the gerrage was the only true proof needed. But one thing they agree on, the transitions had to be fast. A good station team could prep a new rider and fresh horse before the dust from the previous gallop had even settled. Whisper lives up to her name in the ironic way. She's fast, jittery, and makes unsettling frog noises. Still, she covers the next leg like a 4-legged blur, and soon you're at the second relay station, this one manned by 2 teen brothers and their elderly grandmother, who feeds you something yellow and says it's half soup. You don't ask for details. You've learned things are better that way. One of the boys offers a bit of local station lore. One time, message came so urgent, the courier rode through lightning. Got shocked. Hair gone. Still made it. You believe him because his eyes are wide with admiration and the fire crackles just right for dramatic effect. There's a kind of rhythm forming now. Gallop. Handoff. Snack. Gallop again. You're part of the living system now, each station handing you onward like a whispered secret. Despite the sore thighs and windburn, there's a strange peace in this relentless progression. Some stations are simple, just a yurt and a horse tether. Others are unexpectedly elaborate. One has a makeshift archery range for riders to practice, another a small shrine painted with birds. The personal touches tell you something important. The YAM wasn't a lifeless bureaucracy. It was lived in, adapted, loved, even. A courier passing you from the opposite direction raises a hand in greeting. She's wearing a scarf covered in embroidered turtles. Togon once said some riders believed carrying turtle symbols kept them from falling off horses. Not magic, he clarified, just superstition that makes you ride better. Late afternoon brings your longest leg yet, across a flat stretch of open grassland with no visible landmarks. You rely on the rhythm, counting hoofbeats between markers, watching the sun lean westward. And that's when it hits you. You're trusting a system built 800 years ago more than you trust modern GPS. In the last hour before dusk, you reach your final station for the day. It's not much, just a yurt, a corral, and a large wooden bath where an old man soaks his feet. He nods as you approach and gestures at the fire pit. "Soup?" he asks. You hesitate. "Half soup." He nods again. You accept. As night falls, the station quiets. Horses are fed, messages secured in oilskin wrappings, and the last coals are banked under ash. You crawl into a pile of sheepskins, your mind still buzzing with motion. The relay hum continues beyond you, stretching across valleys and peaks, deserts and forests, an invisible nerve system keeping the empire stitched together. And you? You were part of it today. Just one rider in a very long line. But you carried the scroll. You handed it off. You made the soup jokes. You're one of them now. Morning breaks with a low whistle of wind through the grassland, the kind that makes your blanket curl tighter around your shoulders. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the first of today's couriers is already galloping, scroll tucked, hair flying. But not you, not yet. Today's pace is different. Togon arrives again, smiling like a man who knows something you don't. Today, he says, we explore how the Yam handled problems. You're not sure what that means, but his tone suggests that by sundown, something will be on fire, or at least mildly damp. You begin with a gentle trot back toward one of the larger stations, where they've prepared a series of case studies. Yes, actual Mongol case studies, but the kind that involve spilled ink, missing horses, and one courier who apparently got trapped in a barrel of fermented milk for 3 hours. Togon assures you this was a known occupational hazard. First issue on the docket, lost messages. It happened more often than you'd think, especially during sandstorms in the western reaches or whiteout conditions in the north. When a courier failed to appear, the network had a fallback, duplicate dispatches. Important orders were often written in pairs, sent by separate riders along different routes. Whichever scroll arrived first was accepted, the second served as verification. Built-in redundancy, ancient efficiency at its finest. Mainstream fact time, the Yam system had detailed backup plans for most routes. Multiple relay paths existed between key cities, some faster, some safer, depending on the season, bandit activity, or terrain. Certain paths were designated summer only or avoid during goat migration, which sounds hilarious until you're trampled by 800 hungry hooves. A fun fringe tidbit, some riders carried emergency poetry. Not kidding. To pass time or calm nervous horses, couriers would sing traditional Mongol verses, some composed specifically for the road. One popular rhyme warns against falling asleep mid-ride and rhymes saddle sore with yak snore. You don't know if it was meant to be inspirational or deeply cautionary, but it sticks in your head all day. Problem 2. Corrupt stations. With so many relay points, occasionally you'd get a bad apple, someone skimming horse feed, altering scroll seals, or faking delivery records. The Empire took this very seriously. Togon shows you a replica of an Imperial warning tablet, metal, engraved, and entirely humorless. The gist: delay a message, lose a hand. Steal a scroll, lose your house. Forge a seal, lose your soul. You get the picture. To keep things honest, Genghis Khan himself had introduced roving inspectors, kind of like mystery shoppers, only armed and highly judgmental. They'd arrive unannounced, demand to see the station's inventory, horse condition, message logs, and personnel. If anything was off, consequences ranged from fines to reassignment to less pleasant things involving icy rivers and rope. Historians still argue whether these punishments were uniformly enforced or selectively applied, depending on one's connections or usefulness. What's clear is that nobody wanted to be inspected twice in one moon. At the next station, you meet a retired inspector named Burrow. He's got a limp, a deep voice, and a bowl of dumplings he insists on sharing. Worst case I ever saw, he says between bites, was a courier who swapped messages for love letters. Rode out with orders to a garrison and delivered bad poetry to a governor's wife instead. You ask what happened. Burrow shrugs. The garrison never got its grain shipment. The wife never replied. That boy left the Yam and became a monk. Probably safer for everyone. Midday brings a hands-on demonstration of another classic problem: tired horses. Despite regular swaps, animals sometimes reached stations overworked, underfed, or plain cranky. The solution: horse rotation audits. Station masters kept logbooks noting which steeds had gone how far, how fast, and how recently. One master named Korchi proudly shows you his color-coded pebble system. Green for rested. Yellow for trot only. Red. You might as well walk. It sounds absurdly simple, but the Empire's success often lay in these humble systems. And if you ever doubt their effectiveness, you're reminded when a courier bursts into the station, leaping from his mount mid-gallop, shouting for a quick change. The station team has a new horse ready in 60 seconds. Scroll handed off, rein switched, flask swapped. The rider is gone again before your tea finishes steeping. Smooth as fermented yak butter. Problem 3. Weather. Rain, snow, dust storms, and that occasional meteorological nightmare called sleet mixed with goat panic. The Yam trained riders to read clouds like books. If a storm looked likely, they'd adjust their speed, route, even their cargo. Paper messages were wrapped in oilskin, then again in hide, and sometimes placed in hollow bone tubes with beeswax plugs. Not elegant, but waterproof. You try holding one, it smells like meat and parchment, which is oddly nostalgic. Some messages were even coded for emergencies. If a dispatch couldn't be read due to weather damage, backup riders carried the same message in a different language or on a sturdier medium. There's still debate over whether the Mongols developed a primitive cipher system for military messages. Some say yes, others argue they just relied on fast delivery and a lot of shouting. The final scenario of the day? Courier error. Missed stations. Dropped scrolls. Accidental naps. It happened. But training was relentless, and a courier's reputation meant everything. Riders who made mistakes were often reassigned to less critical legs, short hops between smaller towns, or routes through flatter, uneventful plains. It was the equivalent of being benched, Togon says. Less prestige. Fewer dumplings. More mosquitoes. You end the day listening to a circle of old riders sharing worst delivery tales. One got chased by wild dogs through a mountain pass. Another arrived at a station only to discover the next rider had eloped with a baker. And one unlucky fellow rode 3 days with a scroll pouch full of beetles because someone mixed up the saddlebags. But every story ends the same way. The message got through. Eventually. The yam, for all its issues, worked because it was bigger than its problems. It adapted, rerouted, retrained, and laughed at its own absurdities. It was human, horse, and habit rolled into one, and you realize now that its strength wasn't just in speed, but in resilience. You sip your evening tea, warmed by fire and folklore. Somewhere, another courier stumbles through snow, another scroll sealed tight under oilskin. And maybe, just maybe, someone else is telling stories about you, too. You wake to the faint but unmistakable sound of someone attempting to sing a lullaby to a camel. Not well, mind you, but with great enthusiasm. It's dawn again, and another day with the yam means another unpredictable blend of glory, grit, and gastrointestinal experimentation. Togon appears just as you're brushing bits of last night's roasted root from your sleeve. Today's mission is a little more observational. You're accompanying a mid-level Yarguchi, a postal coordinator, on his inspection rounds. His name is Ganbader, and he looks perpetually unimpressed. Not grumpy, exactly, just like a man who once saw a courier eat a dispatch scroll as a joke and has never quite recovered. The goal? Evaluate the human element. How do people, riders, station masters, even stable boys, make this whole empire on horseback system run? First stop, a mid-range relay station bustling like a barnyard bazaar. Ganbader points out every role. The station master, usually a respected elder or skilled logistics mind, runs the show, tracking horses, riders, messages, weather reports, and occasional chicken thefts. Then there are the stable hands, responsible for grooming, feeding, and occasionally singing to the horses. And yes, it seems that's not a fluke. Some believe horses run better when serenaded. Historians still argue whether this was cultural tradition, superstition, or simply a way to pass time without inventing TikTok. Then there are the cooks. Always underrated. A good yam cook didn't just feed you, they timed meals with departures, kept meat fresh in underground pits, and knew 5 ways to disguise turnips as something edible. Togon swears one cook in the steppe could make soup from hooves and sorrow alone. Mainstream fact break. Some larger yam stations doubled as local community hubs, where merchants rested, pilgrims stopped for news, and even cons might pause during inspections. This blurred the line between postal relay and civic center. A post station might host a wedding, a court case, or a goat auction before noon. Fringe detail. In some records, there are mentions of message children, young teens who memorized dispatch contents in case scrolls were lost. They'd recite entire letters from memory at the next station, sometimes embellishing a bit. Were they reliable? But it shows how seriously the Mongols took their communications. Back to Ganbader, who's inspecting a young rider's saddle and asking pointed questions like, "How often do you oil this?" And, "Is that actual bird poop or just aesthetic?" He checks the grain supplies, tugs a horse's tail, to check for grooming compliance, you hope, and signs off with a grunt of approval. As you travel to the next post, Ganbader tells you how yam personnel were sometimes rotated between stations. This reduced favoritism, kept skills sharp, and ensured no one got too cozy with the same pot of fermented mare's milk. It also helped spread best practices, like how one station figured out using pine tar on reins kept them supple even in snow, and that trick caught on across the network within months. Then there's the subject of rider personalities. You'd expect discipline, seriousness, stoic resolve, and yes, some were like that. But others. Ganbader tells you stories that sound more like sitcom episodes than statecraft. Like the courier who named every horse after vegetables, or the one who insisted on singing Mongolian pop songs from the future. Okay, probably just old folk tunes that sounded weird. One station master kept a pet fox that supposedly warned of bandits by sneezing 3 times. The fox's accuracy was, apparently, statistically debatable. Historians still argue whether there was an official yam culture, a code or ethic that all workers shared. Some claim a strict hierarchy and militaristic tone prevailed, others point to localized traditions and more fluid behavior. Probably both were true, depending on geography, era, and whether or not the Khan was watching. Midday brings a quieter station, older and wind-battered. A one-eyed stablehand named Tranquil shows you how they check for fake carriage passes. Counterfeits were rare but dangerous, allowing unauthorized messengers to ride, potentially carrying false messages or stirring up rebellion. The simplest method. A known rider had to vouch for a stranger. If no one recognized you, you'd be detained until someone did, or until you proved you could recite Genghis Khan's birth story backward in rhyme. Tranquil is joking, you hope. The people of the Yam weren't just employees. They were links in a living, breathing system. Couriers memorized landscape quirks the way sailors memorize stars. Station masters treated weather like a second language. Even cooks and grooms took pride in the empire's speed. And it paid off. Letters reached their destinations with mind-boggling accuracy for a medieval network that relied on hoofbeats and human lungs. But even the best systems need motivation. Ganbader explains that rewards for good service ranged from silver coins and warm cloaks to promotions and, sometimes, tiny plots of land. Recognition by the local Noyan, lord, could elevate a rider's entire family status. One famously fast courier, nicknamed Four-Horsed Seed, had a song written about him that was still being sung in parts of Mongolia centuries later. You pause at the last station of the day, where the staff are holding a small festival in honor of a retiring postmaster. He served 42 years and delivered messages under 3 khans. He receives a carved saddle horn, a sheepskin cloak, and a communal toast in mare's milk. It's not glamorous. It's not loud. But it's full of quiet reverence for someone who spent their life connecting others. As the sun dips low, Ganbader finally relaxes. This, he says, gesturing at the firelight dancing across yurts and smiling faces, is why the Yam worked. Not horses. Not scrolls. People. And maybe he's right. You find yourself thinking less about the network as a machine and more as a village stretched across 1,000 miles, a giant family linked by hoofprints and hospitality. From one yurt to the next, it thrived on people who cared, sang to their horses, and occasionally bribed each other with dumplings. You head to bed that night not just a rider, but a witness. You've seen the gears behind the greatness, and they're not made of steel. They're warm hands, clever tricks, and the occasional fox sneeze. Sleep comes easier now. The Yam has a rhythm, and so do you. Gone are the aches and hesitations of your first ride. Your dreams even start to smell like horse sweat and fire-smoked wool. Togon greets you this morning with a rare grin and a suspiciously ornate saddle blanket. We're heading to the imperial roads today, he says, where the mail ran faster than gossip. You mount up, and the day begins with a hard gallop over open steppe, the wind slapping your cheeks like a stern but loving aunt. Today, you're tracing the long arteries of the Mongol Empire, the major relay lines that connected the beating heart of Karakorum to distant administrative outposts in Persia, China, and Eastern Europe. These were the superhighways of their day, graded, patrolled, and, in many places, wide enough for 10 horsemen abreast. Mainstream fact, the Yam included not only inland relay routes but also coordinated maritime routes along the coastlines of East Asia and into the Persian Gulf. The Mongols weren't seafarers by tradition, but they were practical. They used what worked. Port cities functioned as water-based relay hubs, handing off messages to riders who continued inland. You pause by a well-preserved stretch of one such route. Though the original surface is long gone, the path is still visible, worn into the land like an old scar. Markers once stood every so many miles, carved posts or stone mounds. These weren't just decorative, they told riders distances, turns, and elevation shifts. In some regions, locals still use the phrase, "follow the Yam stones," when giving directions. A quirky tidbit for the road, Along the most trafficked paths, riders developed a kind of trail shorthand, rocks piled in certain shapes to warn of washed-out bridges, temporary camps, or a patch of grass particularly beloved by aggressive sheep. Some riders even carved faces into waystones to make lonely stretches less gloomy, though one chisel-happy courier got reprimanded for turning a sacred marker into a grinning goat. As you continue, the sheer scale of the network becomes clearer. You pass a junction where 3 relay lines meet. Togon explains how messages were triaged here, some redirected, some copied and sent simultaneously to different commanders. The Mongols didn't waste time repeating messages across the empire. They anticipated needs. You get the sense they would have loved email filters. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan personally designed the major route layouts or whether his generals and advisors adapted pre-existing trade trails like the Silk Roads. What's clear is that the Mongols elevated logistics to an art form. These weren't just repurposed caravan paths. They were overhauled, optimized, and overseen like state secrets. You arrive at a bustling regional hub, a megastation built like a fortress. High wooden walls, reinforced yurts, multiple stables, a smithy, and even a bathhouse. Here, elite messages were processed, sometimes translated, and transferred to faster riders or more secure packages. Imperial edicts were sealed in heavy wax with bronze emblems. Some even had embedded threads of dyed silk, each color indicating a different clearance level. You try not to touch anything. Ganbater is here too, briefly. He shows you a replica of a triple-sleeved dispatch case, a waterproof leather tube within another. The message inside is no bigger than your palm, but protected like a newborn. This one, he says, went from the emperor to his Persian viceroy in 22 days. That's over 3,000 miles. You raise an eyebrow. He nods. Yes. Fast horses. No naps. And while you're marveling at the engineering, a rider arrives with a fresh message pouch. He's covered in mud, bleeding from a shallow shoulder gash, and humming cheerfully. He swaps scrolls, swigs from a flask, and is off again within 3 minutes. Late, Ganbater mutters, checking a sundial, by 8 minutes. You resist the urge to clap. Another odd detail. Some imperial roads had special stopping stones, giant, smooth-surfaced rocks where riders could lie flat to rest their backs. After hours in the saddle, that brief stretch could mean the difference between making it to the next post and collapsing into a goat pen. Local children called them nap rocks. You spend the afternoon shadowing a message's journey through the station. It comes in sealed in wax and hide, is registered in a thick logbook, passed to a translator who mutters over the script, likely Persian or Uyghur, then handed to another rider whose horse is already pawing the ground. A horn sounds. Off he goes. The whole process takes under 30 minutes. It's smoother than your local post office and smells much more like mutton. But it wasn't all speed and shine. The farther from Karakoram you traveled, the rougher the paths. Some roads led into deserts, through mountain passes, across rivers swollen with spring thaw. In those places, the relay stations grew scarcer, and riders had to improvise, hunting, foraging, repairing their own gear. You ask Togon if those paths were still considered yam. He shrugs. If a horse goes there, and a scroll arrives, yam enough. As the sun sets, you pass a weather-beaten marker at the edge of the road. It's cracked and moss-covered, but you can just make out a carving, the faded image of a horse with wings. Mythical, maybe. Or maybe just an exhausted courier's way of dreaming aloud. You make camp by the marker. Someone plays a soft tune on a morinkur, the Mongolian horsehead fiddle, and you're lulled into a kind of trance. You think about those ancient superhighways, dirt under hooves, wind in ears, scrolls bound tight against the rain, and how every beat of a gallop carried an empire's will forward. Tomorrow, you'll ride further. But tonight, you rest where history once thundered past, fast and focused, on 4 legs and a prayer. You awaken stiff but satisfied. The road has changed you. Literally, your hip now makes a clicking sound every time you stand up. Togon cheerfully ignores your struggle and hands you a hunk of bread with something vaguely fishy smeared on it. We've got a long ride today, he says. Time to visit the far ends of the yam, where the edges blur and rules go squishy. You mount up and head toward the frontier stations, those lonely outposts flung to the furthest reaches of the empire. These places weren't just remote, they were mythic. Some riders never returned. Others came back with stories of ghosts, singing trees, or Kazakh cheese so powerful it could end a marriage. The yam out here had to adapt to terrain as wild and unpredictable as a goat in a thunderstorm. You ride through landscapes that shift from scorched desert to forest to ankle-deep snow in a single afternoon. At one point, your horse refuses to go further until you both rest under a tilted pine tree shaped like a question mark. Even nature seems confused out here. Mainstream fact: on the empire's fringes, especially in Siberia, Anatolia, and parts of Southeast Asia, the relay system often merged with local courier traditions. The Mongols were brilliant at absorbing regional knowledge. In some cases, they even allowed local horse breeds to be used instead of the standardized Mongolian stock, so long as the delivery speed met quota. One of the outermost stations you reach is part tent, part cave. The postmaster is a Tuvan man with a long gray braid and a voice like gravel soaked in honey. His greeting, "You're late." Togon says, "We weren't expected." The postmaster shrugs. "You're still late." Then he breaks into a grin and offers fermented turnip soup. You watch a delivery come in, a stack of tightly wrapped scrolls, carried by a rider whose boots are made of fur and stitched bark. His horse looks more like a moose. He's been traveling through permafrost for days and casually mentions outrunning wolves twice. You decide not to complain about your sore ankles. Fringe tidbit: some frontier stations used dog sled relays during particularly harsh winters. Horses simply couldn't manage the deep snow and ice, so local sledders, often indigenous Siberians, were contracted into the yam. These weren't just emergency workarounds. They were respected nodes, and in at least one case, a dog team outran 3 cavalry messengers in a snowstorm. That's the thing about the yam: it wasn't rigid. It flexed. It flowed. It morphed around rivers, borrowed mountain passes, and sometimes included entire nomadic clans who operated seasonal stations as a side hustle. Historians still debate how much of the frontier yam was centrally organized versus locally improvised. The answer: probably both. Genghis Khan laid the bones, and the edges grew wild. Your next stop is a station on the border of the Persian satrapies. Unlike the minimalist steppe posts, this one's ringed by tiled walls, and the couriers wear embroidered vests. They serve you spiced tea and rice wrapped in leaves. The postmaster quotes poetry while overseeing saddle rotations. The mail pouch smells faintly of rosewater. You're beginning to suspect not every station faces goat-based disasters. Here, the yam interfaces with the Persian bered, an older postal tradition absorbed into the Mongol system. Scholars still argue whether the bered influenced the yam, or whether the yam bulldozed it politely. But it's clear some Persian administrative techniques, like message duplication and early encryption, bled into Mongol practices over time. And the further you travel, the more linguistic surprises crop up. Some couriers speak 6 languages. Station logs are written in Uyghur script, Chinese characters, Arabic calligraphy, sometimes all on the same scroll. You watch one rider read aloud in Mongolian, translate to Persian, then summarize in Turkic. He does it with one hand while eating dried apricots. You ask Togon how the Khans kept track of all this. He grins and says, "With great suspicion." Apparently, some outer stations were occasionally tested. Decoy messages would be sent through to catch leaks or inefficiencies. One poor courier once rode 700 miles delivering a letter that simply read, "Good. You passed." A little later, a minor sandstorm forces your group to take shelter in a sunken way station barely visible from the main path. Inside, someone's painted murals, bright, folkloric depictions of winged horses, scrolls with eyes, and one oddly detailed octopus. Yam artists, Togon says, had a lot of time during long winters. He points to a corner where a weathered set of bells hangs, bronze, worn smooth by wind. Used to call in stray riders, he explains, or signal a friendly station in bad weather. You lift one, and it hums low, like a sleepy giant purring. The sound wraps around your spine and settles in your lungs. Night falls before you reach the next station. You camp among rocks etched with messages. Riders sometimes carved short notes to friends or rivals, or warnings about road conditions. One reads simply, "Storm ahead. Horses tired. Send millet." Another, "If you're reading this, you owe me socks." In the firelight, Togon tells you about the legend of the Endless Scroll, a supposed message sent at the Empire's peak that never arrived, passed endlessly from one post to another as a rite of passage for the newest rider. No one knows what it says, only that it's sealed with a gold thread and cursed with eternal delay. Probably just Mongol HR's way of hazing interns. You fall asleep that night with the wind rattling the scroll tubes strapped to your saddle. Somewhere out there, another rider does the same. Another yurt, another fire, another morning gallop ahead. And through it all, the yam connects you. Not just with mail or orders, but with strangers who share your rhythm, your miles, your song to the horses in the dark. Your final morning on the yam begins not with a sunrise, but with a drumbeat. Not a battle drum, nothing so dramatic. Just a low, hollow thump echoing from a nearby ridge, where a lone rider pounds a makeshift drumskin stretched across a dried horsehide. It's not a signal of danger. It's a relay notification, a sort of, "Hey, I'm coming," tap, used in foggy or forested regions where visibility is poor and shouting risks attracting bandits or bears. You add it to your growing mental list of yam quirks. Just below, scroll tubes double as pillow rolls. The rider appears moments later, wrapped in layers so dusty you'd think he wrestled a sand dune. He's grinning, though, and clutches a scroll marked with a braided crimson tie. Togon nods and passes him a replacement satchel, preloaded and ready. No words are exchanged. None are needed. As you mount up for your final stretch, you realize that in the weeks you've been traveling, the yam has begun to feel, well, oddly intimate. Like a gigantic, empire-spanning group project, but with less arguing and more horse sweat. Mainstream fact, at its height, the yam relay system could cover over 200,000 miles across Asia, with more than 1,000 relay stations in operation. Riders were often able to travel over 200 miles per day, 4 times the average of most medieval couriers, thanks to rapid horse changes and the efficient infrastructure of the stations. But it wasn't just speed. There was something almost spiritual in the act of relaying a message. Riders treated scrolls with reverence. They were not just letters, they were symbols of the Khan's will, of trust, of continuity in a world full of chaos and weather-induced detours. You pass through one of the oldest stations still in use, a weather-beaten wooden structure with iron nails so rusted they look like cinnamon sticks. Carved into a support beam are dozens of dates, initials, and tiny stick horse drawings. You spot a crude horse-shaped yurt doodle not unlike the one you saw weeks ago in the central steppe. Togon confirms, riders have a tradition of marking the stations they reach in this way. Some names are lost, others remembered. All of them still here. A fringe detail. One relay master, deep in the forests of Manchuria, apparently developed his own version of shorthand using pine cone placement. 1 cone upright near the post. Clear path. 2 cones laid flat. Mudslide. 3 cones stacked in a pyramid. Bandits, or really angry deer. There's only one surviving reference to this pinecone code in a 14th century court log, but modern scholars love debating whether it was brilliant or just the result of severe cabin fever. Soon you arrive at a summit. Below you, the road twists through golden plains, dipping into green valleys and curling like a ribbon around low hills. In the distance, you see the edge of another province, the place where this line of the yam hands off to the next. Togon dismounts and motions for you to do the same. "You made it," he says simply. Then he points to your saddlebag. "Your message." You blink. You'd almost forgotten. Tucked deep inside is a dummy scroll, wrapped in silk, sealed with wax, labeled in Uyghur script. You remove it gently and hand it over. Togon doesn't open it. He just tucks it into his own pouch and nods. "No idea what it says," he mutters, then smirks. "Could be a menu. Could be poetry. Could be the same scroll that's been circling the empire for decades. Doesn't matter. It got here." You sit together by the edge of the ridge. No talking, no horses whinnying. Just the wind and the far-off glint of another postal yurt, barely visible beyond a grove of trees. Historians still argue whether the yam should be seen as purely a military innovation or as one of the earliest functional civil postal systems in history. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the hoofprints. Yes, it carried wartime commands and strategic orders. But it also delivered grain requisitions, tax documents, marriage proposals, and apologies. All things people still mail today, albeit with fewer wolves involved. Togon eventually rises and offers you a strip of cured meat. You decline. You've grown fond of your teeth. He shrugs and eats it himself, muttering something about tourists. That night, you camp in a quiet valley near the last station of your journey. The fire crackles. The stars spin slowly overhead, and your bones seem to settle into the earth itself. The road, the horses, the endless scrolls, they swirl together in your memory, indistinguishable from dreams. Your eyelids grow heavy. The story doesn't end with you. Tomorrow, another rider will gallop off, scroll tube clinking softly. Another message will find its way home. The yam continues, quiet but relentless, like breath through the lungs of history. And now, as the wind hushes and your limbs grow still, it's time to let go. Wind down. 300 words. The horses have gone quiet. You can still feel the gentle sway of the saddle in your muscles, the way your boots carried dust from station to station. The campfire's warmth lingers, flickering gently across your hands, casting sleepy shadows on the soft curves of the yurt's interior walls. Outside, the wind curls across the grasslands in long, slow sighs, weaving through tall reeds, brushing your tent with the faintest rustle, like parchment turned by fingers too tired to finish the sentence. Your breath slows to match that rhythm. Somewhere far down the relay path, another rider shifts in their sleep. A scroll is tucked safely beneath their blanket. A saddle rests on its side, worn and cracked but dependable. The yam never stops, not really. It only quiets for a while, like this. And now, you let the weight of the miles fall away from your shoulders. The road fades into memory. The hoofbeats soften into the distance. And your thoughts drift like dust caught in a shaft of morning light. The message has been delivered. The journey complete. The fire dims. The stars blink slowly. You're exactly where you need to be.